Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming on registration day here at MIT. A lot of things going on today, but I appreciate you taking the time to sit in and hear about the Bridge Project from various perspectives and dimensions. This is an exciting day for us, actually. It sort of launches phase 2 of the Bridge Project in a formal sense. A lot of information to go through over the next 4 hours. Introductory material presentations from current Bridge Project holders, as well as information about diseases and opportunities that could inform future Bridge Project grants. This is an exciting time for us. As I mentioned, it's sort of the transition from phase 1, which was a very successful phase, to phase 2, which will be an expanded phase for sure, and I think an even more successful one in all sorts of ways. So I'm just going to run through a few introductory slides. Some of you who've been to these meetings in the past have seen these before, but for those of you who are new to the program, this will be helpful. So as I mentioned, this is a collaboration, an obvious collaboration between two great intellectual powerhouses in Boston, Harvard and MIT, to bring together their strengths in science and technology and medicine to approach really difficult problems in cancer, which is a disease that ties us together, one that we care a great deal about, one that we think together we can make great inroads in. In particular, we recognize that the two campuses have complementary, somewhat overlapping, but also complementary strengths. Here at MIT, certainly in engineering, but also in advanced cancer science. At the Dana-Farber Harvard side, also in engineering and advanced cancer science, but importantly also the clinical implementation of new ideas and discoveries and technologies directly in cancer patients. And we think the bringing together of those two sets of skills, or collections of skills, is particularly powerful. And we're motivated on the administrative side to enable this to happen. You might think that proximity would take care of it. Turns out that's not enough. Structure is helpful. This is an example of structure that brings people together to facilitate those discussions, and money helps. And David already has alluded to the important power of the mighty dollar. Each of the Bridge Project teams is composed of investigators from both sides of the river. That's part of the definition of what a Bridge Project is. It has a PI from MIT, it has a PI from Harvard, it could have multiple PIs from both sides, but minimally it has PIs from each campus. We favor projects that have an interdisciplinary theme to them. Almost by definition, that's true. And we favor projects, as I alluded to, that have an advanced science and engineering. We're not trying to do the run-of-the-mill cancer research with this program. We want to take transformative steps to really tackle challenging problems. And also, in particular, and this point needs to be emphasized, we and our donors are very interested in seeing these projects lead to clinical trials and clinical impact. We do support basic science with these grants. We do support technology development with these grants, but we're particularly interested in supporting work that will make its way to the clinic in the relatively near term. Those points are emphasized here. We're looking for high-impact projects that address unmet needs, and I'll describe in a little bit more detail in a second what some of those are. The strong clinical implementation as well, and the innovative nature. We want to be blown away. David Livingston likes to say, we like grants that take our breath away, and that's true. The reviewers sitting in the room want to be amazed, startled by your brilliance. That's what we're looking to fund with these projects. You'll hear some examples of that from our presenters today. So pay attention for the flavor of the grants that we're trying to fund here. As I mentioned, the teams that comprise Bridge Project teams have to have a PI from each campus, from Harvard and from MIT. On the MIT side, they do not have to be members of the Koch Institute. Any MIT faculty member is eligible to be a PI on one of these grants. On the Harvard side, I think the same is true. I'm looking at David to know if that's true. It could be that those folks are all members of the DFHCC. David, do you want to comment on that? They should be. They're expected to be. But here at MIT, it's open to every faculty member on the campus. Importantly, as you think about what a team should look like, these cannot be just made up for the purposes of qualifying to be a bridge project team. It's very important that this is a meaningful collaboration that has real substance to it, where it makes sense that these investigators are working together, bringing together these complementary strengths. It's frankly very obvious to the review committee when that is not true, and those grants historically have not fared well. We have upped the budgets for the program, in part as a reflection of the new funding, in part as a reflection of just inflational increases in costs of science. But they are well-funded grants. These are $400,000 per team per year, and they're typically funded for 2 years. The expectation is that they'll be funded for 2 years, but we actually review the grants after 1 year and reserve the right to stop funding if we feel that not enough progress is being made or if the investigators aren't taking their project seriously. But if all goes well, it's $800,000 of funding, which is roughly split between the two campuses, between the two sides, although we're not strict about a true 50-50 split. The proposals are manageable. They're 5 pages in length. We want to know, broadly speaking, what you're doing. We need enough detail to be able to judge the feasibility and understand what you're trying to do, but we're not asking for excruciating detail. Importantly, it's not mentioned here, but this is actually a 2-step review process. Initially, when you apply, you put in that 5-page grant. It is reviewed along with the other grants, and then the top group of grants are selected for an in-person interview with the review committee. And that's an opportunity for you to provide even more detail if there are still questions beyond what you've written. We don't know yet how many grants we will fund, but our expectation with the new funding is that we'll go beyond what we've been funding in the past, which is roughly 4 grants per year. We now expect to fund at least 6, perhaps 7, perhaps more grants per year. So that's a substantial increase, and that should encourage more of you to throw your hats in the ring for consideration. The range of disease entities that we support is growing. In the first year of this program, 4 years ago, there were only 2, brain cancer and pancreas cancer. As you can see from this list, there are many more disease sites that are appropriate for Bridge Project grants, including 2 new ones, which we'll hear about in detail later in this program, leiomyosarcoma, and George Dimitri will tell us more about leiomyosarcoma. If you don't know very much about it, you will shortly, and multiple myeloma. And Nikhil Munji will be telling us more about that disease. We're excited about these diseases. There are big barriers, big hurdles to the management and proper treatment of these diseases, and there are funds available for grants that are successful in these areas, specifically for these grants. Beyond these cancer types, there are a few other topics that we have focused on for a variety of reasons over the years. The first is cachexia in cancer, wasting that occurs in the late stages of cancer development. We're also interested in supporting grants in the areas of cancers that have a viral etiology, and Merkel cell disease is one example, but there are others. And we're also interested in various technologies that are relevant to disease monitoring. These might be imaging technologies, but other monitoring technologies as well. Lots of entities around the 2 campuses, that is to say departments and centers, have received Bridge Project funding. Lots of departments here at MIT, lots of the hospital components of the Dana-Farber Harvard side. And so you can see that we're spreading our monies broadly. We like to spend broadly. We like to encourage involvement as far as we can across the campuses to look for talent and opportunities wherever they might lie. We funded projects in 4 years. The first phase, as I called it, 2012 to 2015, In that period of time, there have been 15 MIT faculty members and 23 faculty members from the Dana-Farber Harvard Cancer side, and these numbers obviously reflect the fact that certain grants have more than one PI. There were 15 grants funded, each of them had one MIT PI, and some of them had more than one Dana-Farber Harvard PI. I'm not going to review all of the grants that were funded. I'll leave these images up for a few seconds so you can see examples of grants that were funded in the various years. Here in the spring of 2012, our first 4 grants funded, and they all had to do with pancreas cancer and brain cancer, as I mentioned. In the second year, we expanded our funding to include a few other disease entities, including lung cancer and melanoma, as you can see here. In the third year, we expanded it still further and included leukemias, and you can see that reflected here. And hopefully by looking at these grants as I'm going through them, you have some sense of the kinds of research that is favored by the review committees for the Bridge Project. And finally, this past spring, we funded the 4th round. There were 3 grants funded, and again, featuring different diseases, different technologies, all with a strong translational component. We measure outcomes and success on this program in a variety of ways. One is publications. There have been 11 publications, and we know there are several more papers in process. And that's an impressive number based on the fact that the project is actually quite new. It's just a few years old. There have been 4 patent applications filed from discoveries made in Bridge Project grants, 1 company formed, other technologies being out-licensed. We know of at least 1 imaging modality that was developed in part through the Bridge Project being used in the context of clinical trials, and at least 1 other, and I think there's probably several other, discoveries and technologies that are being readied for clinical trials as a product of the Bridge Project. And these are the sorts of things that we're looking for to demonstrate the success of this program. Publications, yes, we all agree that those are important. New companies suggest that things are getting out from our labs and being implemented. Clinical trials where patients are directly being impacted. That's what we're trying to do here. Another way to measure success is whether Bridge Project teams have received validation of their ideas from other agencies, somewhat to go beyond what the Bridge Project was able to provide. And as you can see from this slide, there are a number of examples of that. Bridge Project teams that have received monies from other sources. So the Bridge Project has primed the pump for follow-on funding. And this too is very important for us. So we've brought you together for a variety of reasons today. One is to introduce the Bridge Project, and I've begun to do that. I'll give you a few more comments in a moment. We'll give you some sense of what we're expecting for 2015. Again, I've given you some of that already, and I'll mention a few more very important things in a moment. We thought it was important that you hear from past award winners to give a sense for what we like to see, and also for them to show off as to what they've actually gotten done. We'll have 2 presentations, one on leiomyosarcoma, one on multiple myeloma, because these are 2 disease entities that we've not featured before. These are diseases that you may be less familiar with. We want you to become familiar with them so you can think about how you might be able to participate in a team on those diseases. And these experts will tell you all the details, or some of the details that you need to know. Dane Wittrup will also give us a talk on engineering assets represented at MIT. That's a daunting task because there are a lot of engineering assets at MIT. But this is for the benefit of the more clinically oriented folks who may not know as well what sort of engineering abilities we have over here. And then when all the presentations are done, there'll be an opportunity for socializing, for network building and bridge building. We understand that it's sometimes a challenge to know who everybody is, even on your own campus, let alone across campuses. This is one of several of these sessions that we hold to break down those barriers and give you the opportunity to meet new people and perhaps form a new team. 2 more grant categories. The first we're calling footbridge grants. These are smaller scale. They're 1 year and they're less money. $200,000 per team instead of $400,000, and these are for earlier stage ideas, perhaps earlier stage teams. that will allow a team to get formed and to generate preliminary data that will help them be more competitive for a future bridge project grant opportunity. So that's a new development, and I think an important one. Second, in part because of our emphasis on clinical translation, we've decided to create a new grant category called expansion or extension grants. These grants are for people who already have or have had bridge project funding, who are on the verge of or are in the clinic, for whom an infusion of funds could allow them to get into the clinic. That's a very expensive undertaking. We recognize that, so we're setting aside monies, and we're deciding still exactly how much, but roughly speaking, $750,000 to be spent in a given year per team in this category. Many of the projects we know are on the verge of going into the clinic, and so will be eligible for this type of funding, and we're excited to spend it in that fashion. So bear that in mind as well. This could be extremely powerful. I will reserve a little bit of time for questions and answers, so if you have some questions about this sort of thing, hold on to them. Just lastly, in terms of details, the projects, the proposals will be due on October 22nd, so that's something like 6 weeks from now. 5 pages. They'll be emailed to the email address shown here. In addition, we would like to know that you're applying earlier than October 22nd, and the reason for that is it helps us, especially Anna DeConnick, organize the review of the grants. So we'll remind you of that later. Sometime in the October-November timeframe, we'll undergo the first round of review. That's based on the written proposals. The highest ranking of those grants will then be invited back for the in-person review, which will take place on December 17th. If you apply for one of these grants, you should circle December 17th on your calendar and don't put anything else on it. Because if you're not here on December 17th to defend your grant, it's much harder for you to be funded. So bear that in mind. And then the grants will begin funding roughly March 1st next year. There's more information on the following website shown here, details about what the bridge project covers, much of the information that I've given you today. And if you have more information or need more information, feel free to contact Anna DeConnick. I'm going to ask Anna to stand up. She is the executive director of the Koch Institute and is my administrative right-hand person here, dealing with all sorts of our interactions, including our interactions with clinical entities in the context of the Bridge Project. And Anna is very knowledgeable about this particular program.